Well, hey, welcome back. Today we're going to be finding out that David has another son that wants him to do another coup, and then actually he's going to finally pass on the crown to another son.
Right. This is the end of David's life, essentially. Yep. He's gotten to the point where he's fought all of his battles, and now he's abdicating the throne and handing it to Solomon in the middle of political turmoil. So that's what we're talking about today on HC Daily.
You're listening to another episode of HC Daily, a daily devotional podcast that you can listen to at home or on the go. We believe that you can grow as much as you want to grow spiritually, and this podcast can be a part of your daily growth plan. So, whether you're watching on YouTube, listening on Spotify, or your favorite podcast app, we're glad you're here. Now, let's join our hosts, Jeff Forrester and Chris Zarbaugh, in the studio.
Okay, Chris, so we get so many card and letter from your fan about just the most minute details of your life. And the one that we're getting lately is, what's your favorite breakfast?
Goodness gracious, what's my favorite breakfast?
Yes.
Honestly, anything with eggs.
Anything with eggs.
I love all eggs.
Yeah?
I love
So you're not a cereal guy, like Fruity Pebbles guy?
Well, to be honest, I do. I love cereal, but I've gotten away from cereal.
Oh, okay.
So the whole milk thing and then the carbs thing.
Okay.
So, leaning more toward protein, but I love eggs so much that, I could have breakfast for dinner all the time.
All right. Like an omelet, scrambled, over easy?
Anyway.
Eggs Benedict?
But if you're asking me what is my most common, I would say it's probably omelets.
Omelets. Mm-hmm. All right. And what do you like in your omelet?
Well, definitely cheese.
Cheese.
The more cheese, the better.
Yeah, okay.
And then anything else in it is fine.
Okay. Well, there you have it, folks. So next time you want to take Zarbaugh out, just buy him some eggs. You can order for him.
Yeah.
He likes a good omelet.
It's cheap. I'm a cheap date.
Cheap date. Okay. That says all you need to know about Chris Zarbaugh. He's a cheap date. Okay. 1 Kings chapter 1. We're going to read. David has another son, adult son, who decides he's going to try to overthrow David as well. David now is 70 years old at this point. As a matter of fact, in the verses prior to where we're starting, it talks about how David couldn't walk anymore. He couldn't keep himself warm anymore with blankets. He's very feeble at this point. And Adonijah, who's a punk, by the way, you're going to find that out, he decides while his dad's weak, maybe he can overthrow him. And here's what happens. We're going to start in verse 5, 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 5. It says, about that time, David's son Adonijah, whose mother was Haggith, began boasting, I will make myself king. So he provided himself with chariots and charioteers and recruited 50 men to run in front of him. He's using Absalom's playbook here, right? It says, now his father, King David, had never disciplined him at any time, even by asking, why are you doing that? Adonijah had been born next after Absalom, and he was very handsome. Adonijah took Joab, son of Zeruiah, and Abiathar, the priest, into his confidence, and they agreed to help him become king. But Zadok, the priest, Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, Nathan, the prophet, Shimei, Rei? I don't know how you say that name. And David's personal bodyguard refused to support Adonijah. Adonijah went to the stone of Zoheleth near the spring of En-Rogel, where he sacrificed sheep and cattle and fattened calves, and he invited all his brothers, the other sons of King David, and all the royal officials of Judah. But he did not invite Nathan the prophet, or Benaiah, or the king's bodyguard, or his brother Solomon. Then Nathan went to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, and asked her, haven't you heard that Haggith's son Adonijah had made himself king, and our Lord David doesn't even know about it? If you want to save your own life and the life of your son Solomon, follow my advice. Go at once to King David and say to him, my lord the king, didn't you make a vow and say to me, your son Solomon will surely be the next king and will sit on my throne? Why then has Adonijah become king? And while you are still talking with him, I'll come and confirm everything you've said. So Bathsheba went to the king's bedroom. He was very old now, and Abishag was taking care of him. Bathsheba bowed down before the king. What can I do for you? He asked. She replied, my lord, you made a vow before the Lord your God when you said to me, your son Solomon will surely be the next king and will sit on my throne. But instead, Adonijah has made himself king, and my lord the king does not even know it. He has sacrificed many cattle, fattened calves, and sheep, and he's invited all the king's sons to attend the celebration. He also invited Abiathar the priest and Joab, the commander of the army, but he did not invite your servant Solomon. And now, my lord the king, all Israel is waiting for you to announce who will become king after you. If you do not act, my son Solomon and I will be treated as criminals as soon as my lord the king has died. While she was still speaking with the king, Nathan the prophet arrived. The king's officials told him, Nathan the prophet is here to see you. And Nathan went in and bowed before the king with his face to the ground. And Nathan asked, my lord the king, have you decided that Adonijah will be the next king and that he will sit on your throne? Today he sacrificed many cattle, fattened calves and sheep, and he's invited all the king's sons to attend the celebration. He also invited the commanders of the army and Abiathar the priest, and they're feasting and drinking with him and shouting, long live King Adonijah. But he did not invite me or Zadok the priest or Benaiah or your servant Solomon. Has my lord the king really done this without letting any of his officials know who should be the next king? King David responded, call Bathsheba. So she came back in and stood before the king, and the king repeated his vow, as surely as the Lord lives, who has rescued me from every danger, your son Solomon will be the next king and will sit on my throne this very day, just as I vowed to you before the Lord, the God of Israel. Then Bathsheba bowed down before her face to the ground before the king and exclaimed, may my lord David, King David, live forever. Then King David ordered, call Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, Benaiah the son of Jehoiada. And when they came into the king's presence, the king said to them, take Solomon and my officials down to Gihon Spring. Solomon is to ride on my own mule. There Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet are to anoint him king over Israel. Blow the ram's horn and shout, long live King Solomon. Then escort him back here, and he will sit on my throne. He will succeed me as king, for I have appointed him to be ruler over Israel and Judah. Amen. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, replied, may the Lord, the God of my lord, the king, decree that it happen. And may the Lord be with Solomon as he has been with you, my lord, the king, and may he make Solomon's reign even greater than yours. So I think we'll stop there.
Yeah. So it's again, we have another coup. We have another rebellious son. And of course, David is just so old at this point. And, it says that he had not even disciplined Adonijah not one single time.
Right.
He never even said, why are you doing that?
Right.
Which means he has given up at this point. He's probably so frustrated with all the different wives and concubines and children and half brothers that they are and half sisters that he has just stopped parenting apparently at this point. And to be honest with you, he's probably very frustrated with himself and the strife that his family has become.
Yeah.
And so this is why this is such a great choice. Obviously, it's foreordained. God knew that Solomon was going to sit on the throne, but it's such a great move for David to do. And he says, may Solomon's reign be, mightier than yours. And as we know now, it was.
Right.
And Solomon surpassed his dad in so many ways. And it was, it's a good move.
So Adonijah has a lot of the same characteristics that Absalom has. He seems to have weaker character. He certainly doesn't have the ability to pull it all off, right? No. Like Absalom. He's like a knockoff Absalom. He's not the same,
Right.
But he goes out and gets his chariots. He goes out and gets 50 bodyguards. He goes out and gets some fancy clothes. He's a pretty handsome guy, and he didn't invest as much time. Absalom had invested 4 years trying to win everybody over, and he doesn't. He just tries to seize the moment and take advantage. But what he does do that Absalom didn't do, he gets Joab to come over. He gets some of the priests to come over. He has some people, and I think in David's weakness, people are just trying to throw in with who apparently is going to be the next king.
Yeah, and not only that,
this is the son who took the initiative to start it all.
Yeah, and it's not just weakness; it's probably lack of leadership.
Oh, sure.
So if David, David said he was so frail and cold that they had hired a woman to keep him warm.
Right.
And that was common back then.
Right.
He didn't have any sexual relations with her, but they hired this beautiful woman to just, lay there with King David just to keep him warm. So he is obviously incredibly frail.
Right. He's on the verge of death.
He's on the verge of death, which means it's a lack of leadership. And those people who the kingdom has to continue to run. And listen, I've certainly been around my share of those situations where everybody's begging for leadership and there's just no leadership provided. And in the absence of leadership, people step up and they try their very best. I mean, geez, I could write a book on that.
So this lack of character, like you'd already highlighted there, verse 6 said that David had never disciplined him at any time.
Yeah.
Not one time.
Not one time.
This is what I think we were talking about with Amnon. This is what we were talking about with Absalom, and now here Adonijah. man, when you don't give a young man purpose, when you don't give direction, when you don't give them correction, the Bible says that if a child isn't corrected by their parents hate them. God says in the book of Hebrews that if God doesn't correct us sometimes, that means we're not even his children, right? He only corrects those that he loves. Correction is a sign of love. And so that doesn't mean that we always give our children everything they want. We make their life easy. We correct them when they need to be corrected. There's consequences to their bad behavior. There's redirection. There's teaching them the right way to go and the wrong way to avoid, all those things. And David just didn't do any of those things. And so this young man grows up totally narcissistic, totally self-centered, totally entitled and privileged. And he decides he can have whatever he wants. And at this point now, he's found a whole bunch of co-signers who are willing to give him what he wants, including Joab and some of these other leaders.
Hey, whenever we talk about disciplining our children, the big thing over the last 30 years has been the spank or no spank,
sure,
right? Did you know there's an actual verse in the Bible, Proverbs 23:13? I've always liked this verse. Whenever we talk about it, it comes to my mind. It says, "Do not withhold discipline from your son. If you beat him with a rod, he won't die."
Right.
So isn't that funny?
Yeah.
It's like if you spank him, he's not going to die, everybody.
Right.
That's literally what it says in the Bible.
So well, I think we have to have an understanding of what a biblical spanking would be. God created a spot on your body that's safe. Right. So beating a kid with a rod all over their body is abuse.
Well, of course.
But a spanking on their rear end, that would be, and that's what that passage is talking
it says
about.
Discipline, yeah.
There's several times in the book of Proverbs that talks about spanking your children. And it's not spanking in anger. It's not beating them, all over their body or doing some kind of physical damage. It's get their attention and make them realize the sting of that paddle is far worse than the benefit I thought I was going to get from disobeying my mom and dad. And the idea is the consequence, or the reason why the book of Proverbs talks about disciplining your children thoroughly and regularly, is for the sake of them learning the pain of doing wrong without killing them, obviously, and the fact that there are consequences to decisions. And if we don't discipline our children, and hey, by the way, we're not advocating go beat your children. We're not advocating
not at all.
Any kind of abuse thing. But what we are saying is there should be strong, clear consequences towards disobedience, bad behavior, self-centeredness, meanness, all those kinds of things. And it's the responsibility of parents to lovingly do it. It's an act of love.
Yeah. So just for fun.
And David didn't do that.
Oh, of course.
So it was a lack of love in Adonijah's life that led him to a coup.
So just for fun, did you spank your kids?
Yes.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
In fact, we even had like a leather spanker. It was actually, and the reason why is because I was told that it's better if children associate not the hand, but they associate something else. You know.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was never really bad.
Mm-hmm.
It was just more. It was more about the act.
Yeah.
So anyway, just figured that's controversial and fun. Why not just talk about it?
Yeah. So now we're going to get all these people.
Oh, who cares?
Sending mean emails and letters. So this is not. So we used a paddle, and it would have been we would set a limit to the number of swats, and that kind of thing, and sit down and explain to the child, hey, what did you do? This is what you did. This is the consequence. And this is what, this is the sentence essentially. Mm-hmm. And then we'd go through it and tried as much as possible, have it be as orderly as possible and not in anger. Right. So it wouldn't be when we're just furious, losing our minds and screaming at a kid. It would be, let's take a pause. And then this is the sentence, and this is the consequence. Yeah,
so we did the same thing. We did a total speech, made sure that the child repeated it back, understood, and then right after like the SWAT, we would hug. We would hug them. Yeah. We would hug them. So it would always end in love. And
tell them, I love you so much.
Yeah, that's exactly what we did. Yep.
Tears in your eyes, kind of a thing.
Yeah, for sure.
And I can remember my mom and dad telling me, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you. And I remember at a point, I was like 8 years old. I'm like, that's just not true.
Right.
That's not true. But when I became a parent, I understood what it meant. Because, I'd have tears in my eyes, too, going, this wasn't necessary. It didn't have to happen. If you just done the right thing, we didn't have to do this. And I think that what you have is the result of a father who loved his sons. He grieves so much. Oh, Absalom, my son Absalom. Remember? Yeah. He grieves over the deaths of his sons. Mm-hmm. He loves his sons deeply, but he didn't love them enough to discipline them. And so an undisciplined child, read the book of Proverbs, an undisciplined child brings shame on his father and his mother. And over and over and over again. We've seen that. You've seen the kids losing their minds in the store, and you go, what's that? You don't think that kid's a bad kid. You think, why isn't that parent stopping that kid from doing that? Usually, right?
Yeah.
The
first thing I think of is, does the kid have any, mental disabilities or disadvantages? That's the first thing I think of. Mm. But so we got to give grace.
Sure.
But at the same time, though, we all have seen the unruly child and the parents don't act, for sure.
Yeah, when a kid is extremely articulate and cussing his mother out because he can't get a Hot Wheel, that's kind of what I'm talking about. Right. So an undisciplined child brings shame to their parents, and this is precisely what we're seeing here with David. And that's a biblical phrase, a biblical statement, by the way. That verse, spare the rod, spoil the child. You've heard people quote that verse before. They usually quote it the wrong way. They quote it like you're supposed to spare the rod because you're supposed to be spoiling your child, and it's not. He's saying, if you don't discipline your child, you're going to ruin your child.
Right.
Nobody wants spoiled food. Right. Nobody wants anything spoiled. That's what they're saying is, if you don't discipline your child, you're going to ruin them. And this is precisely what happens here. So ultimately what happens is David then, Nathan sees what's happening. Remember Nathan the prophet?
The prophet, yeah.
The one who came and confronted him on Bathsheba. He also became an advisor to the king, all this stuff. He sees what's happening, and he preemptively goes to Bathsheba and says, okay, now here's what you have to do. Go in, tell him what's going on, and I'll come right behind and confirm it. Yeah. Because remember, women's testimonies weren't always believed.
And by the way, we sometimes do that to you.
Yeah.
So when you're in your office and we want to approach you about a question, we'll say, okay, what's the best way to attack Jeff?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and I always see it coming, and it's just, yeah.
No, you don't.
Yeah, I do too.
No, you don't.
I do too.
No,
I read
we're very cunning
through
and sly.
you guys.
We're so sly.
I can read you like a book.
Yeah, we play you like a book.
You're not that sophisticated, let me tell you.
Hey, so here's what I think. I think that this is actually poetic. That it's actually Bathsheba's son and her line. Uh-huh. So you think about all the different wives that David has, all the different kids, and Bathsheba is representative of David's worst mistake in front of the entire nation of Israel and in God's eyes. And so this redemption of, even Jesus comes through the lineage of Solomon, through David and through Solomon. And so it's pretty amazing how God is able to take something so bad and redeem it into something so good.
Yeah.
So it's not just
really beautiful.
It's not poetic. It's also consistent of what God does today. Yeah. So God is in the habit of taking something bad and redeeming it for something good. And it could be something really bad. And in the midst of even the bad choices that we make, God will pull beauty from ashes. And, he has that ability. And so it is. It's poetic, and it's also reflective of God's promises too.
Yeah. You have Bathsheba seems to have a significant impact on Solomon's life. So you'll notice when Amnon's name was mentioned, it mentions his mother. When Absalom's name is mentioned early on, it mentions his mother. Here, what's his name? Abiathar, is that his name? Adonijah, I'm sorry, is mentioned. It mentions his mother. And when Solomon is mentioned, it mentions his mother. So David abdicated his responsibility as a father, apparently, over and over. It wouldn't even discipline Adonijah. But Solomon had grown up to fear the Lord. Solomon had been trained. When you read Proverbs 31, it appears like maybe that's from Solomon's mother to Solomon.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. I've always believed that.
And so this is a really special thing to realize that the impact of a godly mother on a child. Right? Versus these other three women and their sons went off the rails. And it doesn't talk about those women raising their sons right either. So David abdicated his responsibility. The moms weren't pointing them towards God either. And then you have this woman, Bathsheba, who raises her son to honor God. And he winds up becoming the greatest king of Israel, right? The wisest man. And so she goes in and she says, hey, this is what's going on. Nathan confirms it. And then David goes, all right, and immediately maneuvers to put Solomon on the throne. So now you're on the verge again of another coup, right? On this. And then one of the most brilliant moves by Solomon where he is sitting on the throne and Adonijah finds out about it and the news comes Adonijah's throwing a big party to celebrate his own coronation. And then word comes, actually, Solomon's on the throne and he's looking for you. And it says at the end of the passage, verse 49, it says, then all of Adonijah's guests jumped up in panic from the banquet table and quickly scattered.
Right.
All those friends, because they knew they were doing the wrong thing.
Right.
Right. But when David finally put it, that's still how much power David had. David was unable to regulate his own body temperature. He couldn't get up out of bed. But the people were still so terrified of David. When David made his decision, they realized, oops, we threw in with the wrong guy. They all abandoned Adonijah that fast.
Did you ever watch The Office?
Yeah.
Where Pam just decides one day that she's going to be the office coordinator, the office manager.
Yeah, yeah.
Guy walks in and she's like, she doesn't want to be a salesman anymore.
Right.
So she just pretends like she's already this new thing. Right. And she gets away with it.
Yeah.
And she pays herself her own salary and everything else.
Yeah, I remember.
And she's like, I'm just going to pretend like like I was the office manager. And then that's what Adonijah is doing. He's like, I'm just going to pretend like it happened. You know, I'm just going to make myself king. Well, the difference is, you know, he didn't get away with it.
Right. So then Solomon very wisely decides not to kill Adonijah in this moment. He said, hey, listen, if he chooses to be loyal, not a hair on his head
right
will be damaged. And then David gives in chapter 2, he gives some final instructions to Solomon, serve God, all these things. We'll talk about that later, but it was just in time that God used David. God used the man of God to send a message to David, say, hey, wait a minute. God's plans are about ready to be thwarted. You need to step in and do something. David steps up and puts him in place. So it's just a really cool thing to see how God's God's plan will always be fulfilled, no matter what men try to do.
Yeah. So we're looking forward to jumping into Solomon because it's a celebrated king, and he's so wise. And so it's a great topic that we're going to dive into, and we'll see you then.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this podcast, please help us spread the word by liking this episode and sharing it on your social media platforms. Be sure to leave a comment and review, and don't forget to give us 5 stars. When you do, you help us reach even more people who need a daily devotional like HC Daily. If you'd like to hear more from Chris and Jeff, they're both teaching pastors at Heritage Church, located in Southeast Michigan. You can get more of their messages by clicking on the Messages tab at heritagechurch.com. Be sure to join us again soon for another episode of HC Daily.